Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's TheatreArtLife one-on-one session with Kafi Pierre. And I'm going to introduce you to this wonderful woman in just a second. But before we get started, I'm going to take you through, if you have not joined us before on a webinar, we have a few housekeeping rules. So I just want to show these to you. On the right of Webinar Jam, you'll see a chat box, so you can ask any questions throughout our session today of me or Kafi as we go through our discussion points. If for any reason you drop out, you can log back anytime via the email link, and you should be able to get back in. Sometimes if you're having any issues, you can't hear us, just log out and log back in again. And a replay is always available if your internet is sketchy, and it'll be sent to you within 24 hours after this session. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited to kick off today's talk about navigating the post-COVID era with Miss Kafi Pierre, who is a creative director. So welcome, Kafi, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm very excited for this discussion. I just wanted to...
So I really wanted to start... Sorry, you go ahead. You can start because there's a little bit of delay between us, as we know. So you start with what you'd like to acknowledge about the current time right now.
I just wanted to start off by saying I know how difficult the pandemic has been on our industry, and the impact has been immense and devastating. So I wanted to honor that before we actually began the conversation. And I wanted to acknowledge the fact that I know we've used this word pivot a million times. We're hearing it over and over and over again. And I feel like it's important to say that for arts workers and artists, it's not as simple as asking us to just pivot to something else. It's equivalent to asking a doctor who's gone through med school, a residency, and has worked their lives and invested so much time and energy into their careers to just say, oh, go do something else, figure something else out. For us in the arts, it's a calling, it's a gift. And it's not easy to just say, let's just find something else to work at and invest in. So I know there's an immense pressure for us to be doing something right now, but I wanted to put a little perspective into that. What if that doing is recharging? What if that doing is refocusing and reinvesting in ourselves? And I know this part of this talk is about navigating, but I feel like we need to honor the fact that we can take this time to reclaim parts of ourselves that we had forgotten because we were so busy hustling from day to day. You can take time to honor and rediscover who you are as an artist and what you want to say. And when it comes to online content and branding, that's super important that you know who you are as an artist and what it is you want to say as an artist. And I also think reimagining the type of career that you want for yourself and the life that you want for yourself. You can take the time now in this hiatus, as I call it, because our industry will come back. You can take the time to kind of rediscover and reimagine the type of life that you want for yourself. And I just wanted to honor those moments because some of us will be able to pivot and shift really quickly, innately, because that's who we are. And some of us need a little more time. And you can take this hiatus and do that. And I'm hoping that our discussion between Anne's experience and my experience, we can give you some like nuts and bolts on things that you can prepare for. Because if there's anything that I know after 25 years in this business, is that a career in the arts, there's no clear path. There's no right way, there's no wrong way. There's just your way. And all you can do is prepare for the unknown with what you do know. And so hopefully this talk and this discussion will give you some little points, things that you didn't think about, and give you some direction. But in the meantime, take some time to reflect and take some time for yourself. If that's what you need to do. I just wanted to honor that because I know it's a really difficult time for everyone.
Well, I think that's a really wonderful way to start, Kafi, because, you know, it has been a big, tough year for a lot of people, and it's not just something we should brush past. So I appreciate you starting the discussion like that. Let's get started, though, in terms of what we can do right now. And we had a little bit of a pre-discussion on what was possible for artists right now that's available out there, classes online, etc. So I know that people may not have a lot of cash and people may not be able to be in a situation to be investing time on their own personal development from a monetary investment perspective. So tell us a little bit about what is available, what could they be doing with some of the stuff that's online?
Well, actually, at the beginning of the pandemic, from what I could see, especially on social media, a lot of artists, fitness, you name it, were putting out classes for free, or really, really very inexpensive or kind of donation based. And there's still a lot of that going on. I don't want to encourage us to not spend money on taking classes in art, because I also think it's important for the artists that are giving of themselves in that way to get something out of it monetarily. But there are still quite a lot of classes out there that people can take online. What I think people can do is get inspiration from the content online. So if you don't have the money to do that, there's so much content. Even prior to COVID, there was a lot of content online. And I think when auditions come back, a lot of it's going to be virtual. And so you're not going to be in a room where you can necessarily be taught something or present something in a way, whether that's a monologue or a script. You're going to be doing a lot of that via Zoom. So as odd as it sounds, because it is monetary, I think investing in Zoom software is super critical right now, or a software that you can present yourself on virtually that is reliable and dependable, because you're going to be doing a lot more of that, whether that's auditioning, whether that's presenting yourself to a director or to a creative director or to a choreographer through a virtual space. And so investing in a software that you can that is very reliable is incredibly important. I think a year, if I'm incorrect, might not have all my facts straight, but a year for Zoom is about $200. Not that bad. And even if you have to save up a little bit, $20 here, $20 there, until you have that $200 to do it, I think that's a really great investment. Or any other software that's out there that could be for free. I mean, yes, you can get Zoom for free, but if you're going to be online virtually for an indefinite amount of time, which is what it looks like, I think that's a pretty good investment. I'm not a spokesperson for Zoom, but I do know that it's quite. It might sound that way right now. That's not the take that I'm trying to say here. But I think that's incredibly important. I also think it's important for artists, whether you're a circus artist, a dancer, an actor, a singer. This is a time, we like to call it your book. So if a singer, you'll have your book, you'll have a number of songs that you sing from different genres. It shows off your versatility, whether that's monologues for actors, whether that's a scene study of some kind. Investing in your book right now, you can do it. You've got all the time in the world, unfortunately, but investing in that is incredibly important. So whether that's coming up with different solos, because what I've realized in the last couple of months, I'm in Canada, in Toronto right now, and the commercial industry is kind of up and running. Well, all of our auditions are online via Zoom. So if you don't know technology or you're scared of technology, start getting familiar with it, because it's incredibly important right now. Go online, take those free little webinars, go to friends who know software really well, figure out how to edit videos on your phone. There's, iMovie and lots of different editing software on your phones. If you don't know how to actually use that software, invest the time in figuring that out, because you're going to have to edit videos down to, 30 seconds of whatever audition you're doing. And that's really crucial. But going back to the more creative part of this, you can research, find monologues, and film yourself. You can come up with 30 to 45 seconds, if you're a dancer, of different styles that you can do at an audition. I've very recently seen auditions that are like, we need a solo, just, dance for a minute, show us what you can do. If you don't have that right off the bat and you're not that type of dancer, or you're not that type of person, where it takes you a little more time to navigate that, and you can't just jump in on the fly, then take the time now to actually do that. Take the time to invest in those markers for yourself. So when a director's like, hey, do you have something hip hop, or do you have something more ballroom style? You'd be like, yeah, sure. Give me 1 second, reset yourself, and you're good to go, because you've already choreographed those things. Film them on your phone. Everybody has access to a phone, hopefully, or your computer, and just have it there for yourself and review it every once in a while, so it's there top of mind. And the same goes for singers, same goes for actors. Just prepare, 3 or 4 different monologues, different songs that you can have ready to go. Because you're not getting a lot of direction with these virtual auditions. And so you're really dependent on yourself to be incredibly creative when submitting your work. So if you have stuff already, it's less stressful. It's less anxiety ridden. We already have enough anxiety right now as it is. So if you can prep yourself as much as you can before that, I think that's really helpful.
Yeah. I guess that's also really important, because if you think about people who are trying to audition, like who are looking for cast or trying to audition from a virtual space, a lot of the way that you might get a job is from the energy you bring to the room, or the performance that you get to do in person. And that's removed from your ability across the internet. So the other way that you can show your preparedness is to be very savvy and like ready, and with a lot of those options that you're saying, so that they can say, oh, she's or he is on top of their game in terms of being ready to be in this realm to audition. And that probably was received quite well, don't you think?
Absolutely. And I know it's even, and this is incredibly difficult for circus artists, because you may not have access to the apparatus that you would normally use. And so even investigating a little bit more in terms of spaces that you can barter with and rent, like say there's a circus space that is teaching kids right now. Hey, I would love to teach classes with them, on a bartering system. But when I need a space to present my work, can I use the space for an hour to tape something? And so you start developing those relationships, which are great. Everyone's sort of struggling in this whirlpool that we're in right now. So if you can start making those relationships, if you don't have a space, whether that's a dance studio, you don't have a friend that has a dance studio or space to actually present yourself, you've now developed relationships with studios and teachers and instructors and owners, where you can say, hey, I have to film this audition. I need a plain blank wall behind me. There's no better space than the dance studio to do that in, or a circus space to do that in, if you don't have that space. And actually, I'm glad you brought this up, because I haven't spoken about your home space. So right now in Toronto, they're being a little more lenient when it comes to the self tapes, because they know a lot of people weren't prepared to jump into that right away. But you can set up a space super simple. A ring light sounds really expensive, and yes, there are ones that cost $400 and $500, but there are also ones that cost $80. So again, you can save up a little bit of money and buy yourself a ring light. I know it sounds maybe over the top for some, because they're like, just use a light from my window, but you'll be surprised at how that comes off on the other side and what you look like. And because it's virtual, what you look like, unfortunately, is incredibly important now. So finding a space where you can put up a sheet that's one color, whether it's gray or dark blue or white, some push pins do wonders. We all know, working stages, and backstage and stuff, push pins work. They work. They're easy to get. Set up a backdrop yourself and a ring light, and that's all you really need to kind of set up a space that looks very professional, that's with clean lines, and that you have no issues with. So, and if you don't have access to that because you don't have space, then okay, cool. We can adjust and maybe find a studio for you to do your work in. But it is sort of important that you have that kind of clean background, so they can see how you move. They can see how you present yourself in a professional setting.
And in terms of that, you've got the online setting, but you've also probably got to submit documentation. And this is yours and my favorite subject when it comes to talking about your CV or resume, depending on what you're calling it, or your portfolio or whatever it is. And I have a few tips on having hired people internationally, what I like to see. But you go ahead, Kafi. How important is the documentation and the text and the portfolio in terms of submission?
It's incredibly important in layers. So your CV or resume, depending on where you're from, what you call it, it was crucial before COVID, when you walked into a room with your headshot and which we'll get into in a second, and your CV, but it needs to be incredibly clear and precise. So you have to understand a director has several on their desk most of the time. And they want to be able to glance at that quickly and get a sense of who you are and your experience very fast. They're not sitting there reading through it, and there really is very little time for that, especially in person. And now online, they're going to be clicking through resumes even faster and scanning even faster. So you want your resume to be really clear. The titles are clear, who directed it and choreographed, the role. That's all you need. It needs to be lined up. It needs to be in what we beg you, please put it in a PDF. Especially when you're sending it to a director or a casting. Please put it in a PDF form. If you don't know how to do that, again, learn the software. Get Adobe, which can be a little pricey. Get other ways to turn that document into a PDF, because sometimes, depending on where you're sending it to, Word can kind of, depending on what they have on the other side, kind of shift your documentation. And they're going to click on that. And if it looks crazy, they are going to move on to the next person. They're not going to sit there and sift through what it should have looked like, try to reorganize it. So a PDF is your best bet. What do you think, Anne?
Absolutely, 100%. And I think also, given the fact that there's some little things that I always say, because it's just the simple things that make you get lost. And say, for example, if you send me a CV that says CV and I file it in a folder, I'm never going to find your name again, right? So even the titling of a CV is very important, to have your name. And I always encourage to have the date or the year at least. So this is my CV or portfolio, and this, so at least when it's dragged to their desktop and they've got 100 of them, and I've done this a number of times, and you're like, oh, where was that? Where was that? And if they ask for an application letter, you must also do that application letter and also name it properly as well. So my name, date, application letter, my name, date, CV. And generally when it gets put in a whole bunch of CVs and things like that, it generally stands out there and it's clear. The other thing is, you always think about, who are you applying to? So if you're applying for a job overseas, make sure that you have the country code of where you are on your phone number. For me, anything that makes you do more work makes you less attractive to me, right? Now, often I know a lot of people here are performers, so, you're applying for different things, but I think I definitely expect that from stage managers when I'm hiring them. But I think case in point, it makes a lot of sense to be just making the job of the person who's receiving your information as easy as possible. And so if you think about, how would you like to receive this information? How is it packaged? Even if you can send, often I do this all the time because I work in multiple places. I will pile all my documents up and I'll put it on WeTransfer. I don't know if you've ever used WeTransfer, but you can pile a whole lot of documents with a lot of space, videos, your CV, everything in one thing, and then I get a link and you send that link to that person. And when they download that link, they get a folder that is completely dedicated to you. They can name it and it's filed and it's great. And that delivery of information is just a great way to show that you're professional, that you're ready, that you know that they are. When you show them that you understand what they need, that's a very attractive thing for an employer. And it's not only the thing, because you're going to be judged on your performance and your ability and everything, but it is such an added bonus because it tells you, oh, this person's ready to come overseas. Oh, this person's ready and understands what we're looking for. So I think that's really, really, really important. And I won't bore everybody because I could talk about resumes for hours, but it's really, really important to think about what that person needs and definitely fill out any application that they're asking for, although it's really boring. Make sure you're touching every point so that they get all the information that they need.
And I actually think...
Go ahead, Kafi.
To tag on to you, I actually think that's incredibly important because where before with artists, you'd send your resume and your headshot and you're good to go. Now you're going to actually have to send your resume, your headshot, and possibly any other documentation, whether that's a show reel, whether that's your Instagram link. And so having hyperlinks on your resume, definitely a thing that you can click on and get to your Instagram page or get to your YouTube page. And I can't emphasize enough, name, email, contact information, incredibly important. I very recently over the summer was looking for a circus artist for a very, quick, nice little corporate gig. And I had, people send in just a link. I went to the extra step of like searching who they were, searching their names. But if you're just going to send a link, most directors don't have time to search for who you are. And so with that package, especially a virtual package, make sure all of that is incredibly clear on your CV. We don't really use dates for performers per se, but we certainly use your telephone number, your email address, incredibly important. I would even say more so than your phone number because of long distance if you're applying for something out of country. But definitely your links need to be up to par as far as being able to find you. I can't, your hashtag or your handle isn't going to help me find who you are, your name, and what you actually, what's actually on your documentation is what's actually on your CV. So know that even with your Instagram handle or your Facebook handle or any of those handles, somewhere needs to say who you are, your full name. You can't just say, Kafi artist.com. Like you can't, it needs to be really clear so we can get in touch with you. And a lot of directors are looking online. We've known this for years now they're looking on YouTube, they're looking online to find artists, to find creatives. And so if they can't get to your page and know exactly who you are immediately because you've named yourself something that doesn't really speak to who you are, they're going to move on to the next person. You want to be able to click save, copy and paste that email, save it and go. And even more importantly, when you're sending that virtual package to an agency, if you want to get representation, having your name in the subject header and having your name on that documentation is incredibly important, and that looking the same. So like you said, it can transfer that stuff into a folder and be able to find it very quickly.
And talk about, I think this applies to anybody in the entertainment industry as as technology evolves and also social media representation is better. How important do you think is visibility for on-stage crew, backstage crew, online, and also consistency in that message for people who are trying to put themselves out there?
Oh, I think it's huge, especially right now. I think you have to know which online virtual media or social media is important for that industry. So for us as arts workers, I think LinkedIn is incredibly important. And to make sure that your profile on LinkedIn is clear and states exactly who you are. Your most importantly is updated and current. But I think for artists, choreographers, directors, social media, as far as Instagram, I guess now TikTok. To be fair, I'm not on TikTok, so I don't know. But I am on most social media outlets, and I would say that to present your work online, I would say Instagram and Facebook are probably still pretty popular, and on obviously YouTube. Uh, but I will say this, if you're an artist, know that choreographers, directors, we're looking for people all the time, even in this time, even in the pandemic. And so when you go to a Facebook page or a Instagram page and we see scrolling within a couple seconds only selfies, we're moving on. Make sure if you're in the performing arts industry that your work is represented immediately and it's versatile. We want to be able to say, hey, I want to, as a choreographer or a director, I want to be, and someone's looking for an artist, I want to be like, oh, look, here they are, go to their Instagram page. I want them to be able to scroll in 10 seconds and see exactly how many, if you're a circus artist, how many apparatuses you actually do. You know, do you do cerceau? Do you do hoops? Do you do straps? Do you do, and I want it within the 10 seconds that it's there, I want to be able to see that to show them, right? Because they're looking at hundreds of people, like you said previously. And so, and it's the same with artist workers in LinkedIn. We want to know what you worked on, how long you were there. If you can put links to, if you're a choreographer, and put links inside, embedded into that description, so we can see, or a still of work that you've done, so we understand the level that you're working with. It's important that you identify those jobs and make sure that they're updated on your pages, whether you're an artist or not. And I think because that's how we're looking for artists now, especially during the pandemic, and especially probably coming out of the pandemic, I don't think that's going to change a whole lot, to be quite honest. I think it's going to be a mixture of in-person and virtual now, especially for international artists. So making sure that your photos and your content on social media is impeccable. Really take the time and make it impeccable, because it's going to represent you. It could be the difference between you getting a job or not. So a little less selfies, more impeccable content.
It's hard because you're supposed to have fun on social media too, and then it becomes a job, right? So it's a delicate balance. And Leah says, I'm never sure how to advertise my SM skills on Instagram. I think, depending on what your skill set is, I don't either. Mostly my Instagram's pictures of my family. But I think that the thing that is nice, some people do use that as a representation if they're on a very visual job, and often I think stage managers are so busy there's not a lot of opportunity to take photos backstage while they're working. But going back to Kafi's comment on LinkedIn, LinkedIn is definitely one of the fastest growing platforms for professional networking. And it does tend to have a bit of a stigma outside the Instagram and Facebook realm. And the reason that, not a stigma, it means it's sort of set higher above that. And the reason is because everybody on LinkedIn is actually a vetted candidate. They have a whole team. LinkedIn have people who vet those, a profile is real. So there's no fake bots hanging around on LinkedIn. So any followers or any engagements that you have, that's a real person. And it's a big wide demographic of people who could potentially fund your project or hire you as a stage manager for your next gig. And I do know for a fact people have been hired into China by their LinkedIn profile and literally been headhunted from China out to the States to be coming to work on projects in China. So I think from a stage management perspective, again, the same with a performer, is to have consistency in terms of across your platforms. So, you know, for example, you might have a lovely LinkedIn profile, and you can be sure that if I'm hiring you from the other side of the world as a director or anybody, you're going to Google that person, you're going to find a Facebook, right? And if this Facebook feed is you partying with all of the performers 24/7, then maybe that's going to be, I'm going to have a second thought about that, right? So consistency across the platform is something that's really interesting. And so that you want to see that you're not trying to perform a particular role in LinkedIn and then you go to your other media platforms and you're telling a different story. It's really important that that message is consistent. And you can be multifaceted, and you can be multi-skilled, and you can have many flavors. I also don't like the way that, you know, if you look at certain people that are just on one discipline and it's just like a million photos of yoga, like surely there's more to your personality than just a million photos of yoga. So, you know, but that's, again, it's my interpretation of everybody views social media in a different way, right? So, and I follow yoga people, right? Because I want to practice. But again, you got to think about how you're representing yourself and how you want to be represented. And I think from a stage management perspective, you're gonna go heavily on the LinkedIn profile, make sure it's up to date, like Kafi said, and then just let those other social medias be your fun platforms, but be mindful of how you're representing yourself across the board. Having said that, there's, you know, I know that on the artistic side, there's been dancers who have, in certain parts of the States, not been given a job because of the lack. It's come down to final two people, and one of them has more Instagram followers than the other, and they've got the job. So unfortunately, we're in that world too. And you know, you'd want to think that you could be just cast for your pure, amazing, awesome talent. And I know there's some awesome talent on this webinar right now. But unfortunately, how you sell yourself is getting in the game is going to give you better chances, I think.
Yeah, it's a tricky balance, right? And I'm not somebody that worries too much about followers in general, personally, but I do understand the economics behind it. But I want artists, especially artists that are like just coming out of school, this must be very overwhelming as far as like they're not doing gigs, and you know there's no gigs to film yourself backstage and do, you know, take the picture with, you know, whoever, to post and all the things that you do to sort of garner attention. And so I think it's less about that right now and more about figuring out what kind of artist you want to be and putting that content out there. So if you have a really if you know you heard this new song and it inspires you, go out there and create some content with it, socially distanced, of course, but and maybe with a mask. But you know, start creating stuff for yourself to present. And even I would even say with stage managers, I know that kind of stuff is hard, but I'm like, a picture of you in a headset and what you're calling is actually quite amazing, because most people don't understand what you guys do. And personally, I think it's incredible. And you're really the conductor of a massive orchestra with many different pieces happening at the same time. And for you guys to represent yourself as far as just like from a pictorial standpoint, in terms of all of the different ways that you guys work, in terms of whether that's a live event or whether that's a circus performance, whether that's musical theater, and just giving people a sense of what you do in that realm. I know your platform and your podcast actually gives a lot of great insight in terms of what people do behind the scenes, and that's why I love it. But a lot of people don't understand what you do, and so even a lighting designer, gather those photos that you've had for years sitting on your laptop of all the gigs that you've done and when you were doing that lighting check, and put it on there, because that shows your creativity, that shows what you guys do. If you guys have your voices on call scripts, take a little snippet of a call script, attach it to a picture and put it up there, right? Because people don't understand the complexities of your job and the complexities of what you guys do every day, and how safe you keep the artists and how organized you keep the entire staff, especially when that show is running. And a little bit like that can show just a snippet of what you guys do and represent yourselves in that way. So I know that sounds that might seem like kind of out of the box, but I think it would actually work in that respect. And so if you have that sort of material, go ahead, post it. I think you said it was Leah. Go ahead, post that stuff. I think it's great, and content matters, and what you say online matters. And I think it's important that you identify who you want to be, and be as authentic as you can be online, without seeming, and don't compare. And it's so hard, but don't compare yourself to anybody else's Instagram or to anybody else's Facebook page. You're seeing the best of the best of the best, and sometimes heavily curated pages. And so just do what comes more naturally to you online. And I think that eventually reads better than a post that may seem a little more disingenuous.
Oh, I agree. So we've got to get in the game too, but the backstage stuff.
Yeah.
I think, this is in John. You ask an interesting question regarding CVs. Do you recommend putting everything quantity or just the known important ones quality? There's no right answer to this question, and the reason that I say that is because I have this kind of argument a lot. In America, you're taught very specifically how to put a CV, but I know, living on the other side of the world and not knowing the directors that American stage managers have worked with and been in touch with, and shows that I may or may not be privy to, that list doesn't mean anything to me. So what I looked for was a more story of who you are. And I think these days, this is my personal opinion, so I know that if you're applying for things in America and that sort of thing, there might be a different mindset. But if you think from an international perspective, we're trying to hire people that you've never seen before, and that becomes, whether it's a performer or a technician or a stage manager, what is going to most articulate who you are. I always say this story because I remember one stage manager wrote on her CV that she does balloon animals. And I just remembered that CV for the next, I still remember, that's 10 years ago she sent me that resume. And the fact that she wrote that she makes balloon animals was this significant sort of point on a CV that made her stand out to me. And when you're reading a lot of resumes, those things are important to include. So I think on either side of the fence, in terms of technical or creative, it's about what's going to most articulately express you, and how are you going to creatively, because I think there's a lot more freedom these days to say creatively represent yourself, even in a text. And Kafi was talking about hyperlinks. It's very difficult for me to explain to people what I do because I'm quite diverse. So I've even got pictures of gigs that I've done in Saudi Arabia, and I've made a little shots of a little movie, and I've put it to music, and I put it on an unlisted YouTube thing, and I've linked that gig to that YouTube. So if they want to see more information about that, what that was and what that project was, they can see that in a visual sense. And what's really important about that is you're guiding the viewer to what you want to see of them. And so that's an opportunity. When you give them information, you're saying, please look at this and please look at this, rather than, and if you give them enough information on face value there, they won't go and Google you and find out anything that might have happened in the past that you don't want them to know about, right? So feed them. I'm just glad that Facebook didn't exist when I was in my 20s. That's all I'm happy about.
Yeah.
So, I think that, it's really important to again, master the tools, learn your technology, and then figure out a way that you want to communicate yourself online. And that's really an important way to do it. And so coming back to the question of CVs, again, ask yourself, who are you applying to and what do you know of their expectations? And even if you want to give them a call and say, hey, are you looking for the traditional CV, or would you like to know more about me? And if you get that clue, then you can tailor your information to service what they need. But definitely from an overseas perspective, more information is better than less for me.
Yeah, and to piggyback off of that, Yeah, names are really huge in the US and in Canada. And so I understand why that question is difficult to answer too. For me, versatility is crucial. So it's not necessarily who the choreographer was, who the director was. It's more about, okay, that means they did this style, that means they did this style, that means they worked in this way, that means they're good on their feet because they did a one-off live fashion show in New York, but then they also did musical theater. And so you kind of get a sense of the type of performer and professional they are by the versatility of their actual CV. So I think that's important too. Also, you try to keep your CV to one page or max two. When it starts to get 3 and 4, it it um it doesn't get read, to be quite fair. You try to kind of contain it to 1 to 2 pages. And so, look at and it's hard when you've been in this industry for as long as Anne has. It's hard to look at the gigs that you've done and be like, well, this one was really great, and this, so those markers in terms of the versatility that you're showing on your resume. I know longevity sometimes matters in our industry and sometimes doesn't. So how long you worked on a show. So you might want to put the show that you worked on 3 years, and then like a couple like gigs that you did that were really massive that would represent you in a certain way in terms of being able to handle multiple situations. And so that could be something that you kind of identify within your own CV, and kind of mix your CV with that sort of content. In terms of artists, it's definitely harder when you've just come out of school. And this is a total sidebar, but in terms of like reels and hyperlinks, they are actually probably more important now than ever. And so putting together a 1 to 2 minute and no longer than that reel of what you have done that is identical to the CV that you're presenting is also a really great addition to your package. So especially when you're applying for visas, or work permits in other countries, they're going to want more content. And so if you have the time now to gather up all the gigs that you've done and put it together in a kind of a cohesive package that you can just kind of send out, and whether that's snippets of shows that you've done, photos, stills of shows that you've done, and then, like Anne said, you can use WeTransfer, Dropbox. There's multiple different platforms now that you can use to send bigger files. Those are some of the easiest. You take that, put it together. Again, I will preface this again, no longer than 2 minutes. If you do it longer than 2 minutes, they're not going to watch it. Put all your best work at the top, because they may just watch a minute. And so you don't want to put your best show or your best solo or your at the end, because you think it completes it. Because we performers like to think of it like a book, the beginning, middle, of end. Put all your best stuff at the top. Put your good stuff closer to the end, because they may not watch past that. Most directors and choreographers will watch 30 seconds of a reel and know and should know exactly who you are as an artist. And that goes for circus artists as well. Put your best foot forward first when it comes to making those reels. And I would say the same for anybody that's creating any kind of package, especially a government package. It should be super precise and clear who you are within the first couple pages or the first couple pieces of data you have in your reels.
So let's also talk about, given the fact, and I think we mentioned this before, and I found it very fascinating that you mentioned that a lot of time when you're auditioning, you're using your body or your voice or your acting ability to get the job. But now you might be in a place where you've also got to do an interview over Zoom so they can get to know you, or things like that. So talk about, is there a need to upskill for public speaking or interviewing practices? And do you think that we're all ready for that?
I don't think we're ready for that at all. And I know when I went through my transition from performer to creative director, that is something that I I had to really get over. That was a huge learning curve for me because I was so used to walking into a room and interviewing with my body and my voice in a very different manner. And so I think taking any sort of public speaking webinar, reading any tips, there's a lot of that on LinkedIn actually, in terms of how to present yourself, what an elevator pitch is, and how to do those things is incredibly important. I was a painfully shy artist and did not like to talk about myself. I had a very hard time writing a cover letter because it was hard for me to say, I did this, I did that, and this is who I am, because that's just not me by nature. And that might happen to a lot of us as we transition and having to do that more in a virtual space. I also used to hate having to see myself on video while I was interviewing because I would get distracted. And so practicing with a friend, if I know a lot of stage managers, you have a lot of actor and performance friends. If you're somebody that's terrified about speaking publicly, practice with them. If you're a marketing director and you don't understand where to look in a camera, you don't understand how to frame yourself in a video to best represent yourself, because what happens in the background matters. Go to people who are in the performing arts to get that advice, directors, choreographers, because we look at the full picture and we can say, yeah, you might want to move that, and maybe you should clear up the background and so it's clear. So you're presented in a professional manner. And I know it's something that people don't necessarily think about when it comes to interviews, but because we're doing it more and more, if you have those friends that can give you some feedback, set a Zoom call with them and say, hey, does that lighting work? You know, do I look like I have bags under my eyes because I have above lighting over my head? Like, we have a plethora of friends in the industry that can help you make sure that your interview looks pristine. And so, yeah, take advantage of those connections and then read up on how to present yourself and how to kind of elevate or pitch yourself, because it's not necessarily a skill that all of us have. Some people are more charismatic and it comes naturally, and for some people it doesn't. For me, it did not. It was one of those situations where I was much better on stage in front of thousands of people with that fourth wall than a one-on-one conversation, and I had to really climb that hill to get past my fear and anxiety of it over the years. And so the time is now. Practice as much as you can. Do fake interviews with friends, because it will definitely come up, and it's come up in commercial auditions. They're like, just speak about yourself. And you're like, what do I say? Right. And so if you have that elevator pitch or that like fun story that you can tell about who you are, it'll be a lot easier to navigate.
Hannah has an interesting question. How do you think marketing yourself for international work will change moving forward? And will people be less likely to pick people who have to travel internationally? What's your thoughts on that, Kafi?
Oh, that's a great question, Hannah. I do think it will change a bit, not to be a Debbie Downer, because of visa implications, because of travel implications. Now, like I said at the top, I do think it will come back. I do think international work will come back for us in the industry. Marketing yourself will be more difficult because you'll have to represent yourself in an exceptional way for them to take that risk, right? So going back to making sure that your CV is pristine, making sure that what you have online is a clear representation of who you are will be even more important in that international setting. I don't think that it will stop altogether. I do think that it will be on a very long pause in that respect. And so you're going to have to sell yourself a little bit harder, if that makes any sense, in terms of your marketing, who you are. But I still think directors, producers want the best people. It's just going to take a little bit more convincing for them to hire, not just hire locally because of the ease and the complications, but things like, if you know you're going up for a gig that's in, a couple months, be proactive and take a COVID test. So when they call and be like, we're really interested, but be like, well, I just got a COVID test done and I'm clear, right? It's just that little extra step that you can do that takes the worry out of them taking a risk. I don't know what that's going to look like in the future, when there's a vaccine and all that kind of stuff. But it's like, okay, when there's a vaccine, and if you're a person that believes in vaccinations and you take it, add that to your package. Hey, I've been vaccinated for COVID, because that's just another step that they don't have to worry about. Oh yeah, she sent it with her CV. Look, she's vaccinated. Great. That means X, Y, and Z. That means they get to check off certain boxes, and you can move forward. I don't know what our new normal is going to look like in that respect, but I do think that we can at least take some measures to make it a little bit easier on the back end for them.
I think also, if I could add to that, on the technical side, there's been a lot of discussions, especially in this region, on how to navigate that. I think from a lot of agencies in terms of events that do stage management and big shows and stuff around the area have gone awash at the moment. And so they don't have their big offices, they don't have their big full-time team. And so what's really happening if a gig comes back, it's like they're hiring one person who has to pull a lot of freelancers together. And so what's happening then is that, they're relying on local resources. So I think it's in certain areas of the world, it's a huge opportunity for local people to upskill and be part of shows, which is a great thing that, in original sense, somebody would, like me, be flown to Dubai to go and run a show. Maybe they're going to decide against flying me to Dubai to run a show and hire somebody locally there. Or they'll still fly me to hire the show, but everybody else on the team has to be local. So I think that from a staffing point of view, they're going to look, especially on the backside of the shows, to be more local. But having said that, like Kafi said, for anybody who's in a circus show in China or UAE or places like, some of you from Macau, you're not going to get those resources locally. So they're going to have to, if they're going to have to move forward, they're going to have to move forward with people from an international sense. So in that sense, it's in your favor, and probably less on the company side, who's going to have to wait until those borders open or those processes are there. And unfortunately, if there's certain people in certain areas of the world that's more easily accessible and open, they're probably going to take them from that location over a place that's still not handling COVID in a great sense. So it's very incentive of all countries to get back on top of it, so that the arts can open the market again. And so you've got those opportunities. If, for example, they say, here in Hong Kong, they have high sort of red alert risks, travel risks of countries and lower levels. So they're watching very closely, and they've got higher restrictions on people coming from certain countries and less so than others. Having said that, travel is still possible, and people are still moving from places to places. People are coming here from London. I know people have gone from here to Dubai. My husband's going into China tomorrow. And so there is a process, and unfortunately on our sense, we're going to have to manage that, and it's another factor of our organisation to factor that in, and hopefully the artists can come in behind that, and we can make it happen in a way, some way, shape or form. Noelle has a great question, which I'm going to totally handball to you, Kafi. What's your advice about writing a bio about yourself or giving your elevator pitch in terms of content? It's hard when the ego or staying humble go to head. What does the balance look like?
I have been through this balance numerous times in the last few years. My best advice is let your ego soar on that one. There is no room for humility in a cover letter or a bio. It is your best selling feature when it comes to online content. Now, that doesn't mean that you overstate things. You still want to be genuine, but you have to sell yourself because you are in a pool of people who are going full steam ahead with everything that they've got. So your humility can come in the interview when you get it. but that bio and that cover letter is your best representation of yourself to get yourself in the room and at that table. And so, yeah, ego is your best friend on that one, my friend. Hope that helps, Noelle.
Also, I think, you touched on a point of understanding where your skill set is. Can you, from a performance perspective, articulate, like, how do you put that in context to everybody else in terms of what your skill set is, what you bring to the table, without overselling or over compensating for what you may or may not be as a performer? Where's that line?
Yeah, it's a fine one. I think you can state how you worked and how you like to work, what parts of a show that really appealed to you, as opposed to saying, well, I was the principal role and blah, 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 blah. It was, I had the ability to work with some really great artists as the principal of blah, 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 right? And so there's some breathing room for humility, but you can align yourself by talking about the relationships with the director or the part of the rehearsal process that you really enjoyed for this role because you were able to engage in this way as an actor or in this way as a dancer, or the choreographer challenged you in this way and you grew in this way because of X, Y, and Z. And that's why you are now excellent at this. So you take a more nuanced approach with how you represent yourself, instead of being like, I did a solo here and I did a solo here and I did a solo here and I did this here and I did this here. Like, you kind of massage it with process-based information, and that way you might seem a little less narcissistic, but still know, hey, I helped this director do X, and by that I strengthened my managerial skills here, or I strengthened my leadership skills when I gained the role of dance captain. So instead of saying I was a dance captain for this, you could say I was part of the show, and then within a few years I was presented with the honor of being dance captain, which strengthened my leadership skills, blah, 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 blah. If you like, I think, did that answer that question? Like, you massage it in a way that is, that still speaks to the quality of work that you do without being too overt.
Is there anything you want to talk about in terms of branding, in terms of you as a person, and putting that out online or as representation? So, for example, you are a dancer, but you want to move into the circus performing, but you don't have that history, or you're trying to go from circus into acting or things like. Is there a way to help that transition from a branding or from a presentation perspective?
That's a great question. That's going to be a little difficult now, because my advice pre-COVID would be go experience directors and choreographers, study certain writers, playwrights, if that's the direction that you want to go. And you can still do that now, but how the feedback you'll get might be a little bit harder because you're not actually in a room to get that sort of criticism. I do think you can still gather a lot of information online in terms of the type of artist you want to be. I think that's actually the key, is figure out what you want to say and the type of artist you want to transition into. I actually think concentrating on one genre probably isn't your best bet. You want to be as versatile as you can. When I was still performing, I would consider my downtime, or my AKA I'm out of work time, time to craft build. And I'd be like, okay, where do I see my career in the next 10 years? Where do I see my career in the next 5 years? What do I need to get there? Okay, do I need to take a scene studying course? Do I need to take a monologue course? Do I need to start building my book like we spoke about earlier? in terms of songs. Like, are you using the same 3 songs that you've used for the last, 20 auditions? Maybe you need to up the repertoire. So you can start like sort of gathering that information, especially now, and preparing yourself in that way to transition. For me, when I did the transition from performer to directing and choreography, I started doing small gigs, assisting directors, assisting choreographers, so I could learn underneath them. I think that's it's going to be a little bit harder now because obviously there's no work to assist in, but that is something that will eventually come back, and you can kind of find your way through that as well. And most importantly, for any artist, there's a lot of access right now, probably more access than I've ever seen to directors and choreographers, whether that's taking their classes online, whether that's listening to webinar in terms of what they're looking for in an actor, what they're looking for in a singer, because they're all doing interviews on Instagram and on YouTube. Listen to them, take in the information, because that's going to inform how you represent yourself going forward. So if you know you really love this director that works in the UK, investigate what type of actor he's looking for, what type of plays he does, and then that will inform the type of work that you start to learn. That way you can navigate a little bit. So when you're in that room, you kind of know who they are. You at least know what they're looking for, and you can put your best foot forward. And I think investigating who you want to work for will inform the type of artist you want to be, and inform the direction you want to go in your career, and then you can kind of navigate from there. Did that answer the question?
I think it did. I think that was wonderful. Yeah. I think that's a wonderful point to wrap up, because we've already hit an hour, so that's amazing. Before we wrap up, I want to just show that we've got a couple of webinars coming up next month in November. For the tech people, we've got projection mapping, the creative and technical approach, which is with a company called Electric Canvas in Australia, who do all the projection mapping on the Sydney Opera House. And so that's awesome. We're speaking to the lighting designer for the lighting for the Empire State Building. And we're talking to a guy named Isaac, who works as a voiceover artist in Los Angeles. So he's going to be telling us about the life of a voiceover artist. And then we're speaking with 2 big Broadway producers in November 23 and 30. So Bonnie Conley from Broadway HD, she's also a Broadway producer, and Neil Gooding, who produces shows in Australia and UK and Broadway. And his way of investing in Broadway show or into musicals and shows in 3 continents is a very fascinating discussion to be had. It's very exciting about how he's trying different approaches in the COVID situation, and different approaches given the landscape of what people and how people are dealing with COVID, and putting his money where his mouth is. So these are some exciting webinars coming up in November. So, and they're all free, those ones. So come and join us. And Kafi, thank you so much for spending some time with us this evening. I really appreciate your wisdom, experience, and advice.
Oh, Anne, thank you so much. This was a pleasure, and I hope we're able to help just a little bit in this time. So thank you so much for the invitation. I really enjoyed the discussion.
And thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll see you again in our next one-on-one session. Thank you.
Take care.